Right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're really glad that you can join us. I am Mandy. I'm one of the Designlab team members, and hosting the webinar today is Kieran. Kieran is a mental advocate working with Designlab, and he has been running these series of webinars for us over the last little while. Today's webinar is a continuation of a particular series that we're doing on animation. And Kieran is going to be talking you through some of the tools that you can use for animation and what they're able to do. As always, we would love to hear from you, both to introduce yourselves to us and let us know who you are and where you're from, which you can do in the chat channel. And that you can find on the top right-hand side of your screen. And the other thing we'd like from you is any questions that you might have as Kieran is talking about this topic in particular. And those you can pop into the questions tab, which is also up on the top right-hand corner of your screen. The other thing we'd like you to be aware of is if you see a question that somebody else has asked and you think it's a great one and you'd love us to answer it, you're able to upvote your questions, so please do that. And what we will do is once Kieran has finished presenting to you today, we will get round to answering as many of your questions that we can in the time that is left. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Kieran, and I look forward to interacting with you all later.
Thanks as always, Mandy. All right, well, let's just jump right in because there's a lot to talk about and not much time to talk about it. So let me just hide my chat and let's enable my screen sharing. And what I'll do is set my Chrome tab to be this one here and then share that. All right. As Mandy suggested, today's topic is going to be about animation tools and what they are used for. So let's dive right in. As always, the talk's going to be around 30 minutes, and then we'll leave time for Q&A 30 minutes as well. And as Mandy said, leave your questions in the questions tab so that we can go back and review those later on. When you're trying to choose which animation tool that you're using for UI design and any kinds of like user experience overall, there's a couple of decisions that you have to make throughout that. And the first decision is the type of animation that we'll be using. So there's three main types of animation. But really what we're trying to do is either we're trying to communicate some sort of idea, whether that's a functional or a structural idea, and I'll come back to what those mean in a second, or whether it's to delight your users, right? Those are the three sort of like two main reasons with three different variations of those within that. So functional, what do we mean by that? So when we're talking about functional animation, we're really talking about how to improve the usability and the user experience of the app or the service or the site, whatever. In this case, we can sort of see there's a button here. When you hover over it, there's an interaction. There's an animation giving you some sort of response to that interaction. And then we also have a few different states. So we have the activate, so that's like the default. When we hover over it, it says like, yes, I'm about to do that. And then it says waiting, so it's loading that activation. And then it's eventually activated, right? So what we're actually doing is we're helping improve the usability of that button to say what is going to happen in the future with that button, and allows the user to know that there's some sort of like loading happening in the background. As well as on the right-hand side there, you can see that we have some like drag and drop animation. So this drag and drop animation is showing the user that something is happening. So as you can sort of see, when you click and drag on it, all the other ones actually dim down. So it's saying that first, this is the one that you're selecting. Second, it also pops it out so you can sort of see a bit of a drop shadow happening and indents it as well. So it gives that illusion of it coming out of frame, out of the rest of the links, and then you being able to like drag and drop. So it's literally as if you're like grabbing it and then like lifting it and moving it over somewhere. So that allows us to sort of like see the functional side of animation. And like when we're doing something, it gives us that, like when we're giving some sort of interaction, it's giving it a response back. Then we've got structural animation. So structural animation really gives us a context or spatial awareness of the entire app, server, site, whatever the case may be. So in these examples, you can sort of see we're going from like a list view kind of thing to a detail view. And what this allows us to see is like our place in the app at any point in time. So we can sort of see like, okay, well, we need to actually click into, for example, that Beats Pro one. We had that list there, and then you click into one, it pops up, and you're able to hit the back button and go back to wherever you need to go, as well as see more detail in that detail view. So that's what I'm sort of saying with the communication of ideas. You're able to actually move between something that's giving you visual feedback as to what you're doing, as well as like a mental model of where you are in the app at this point in time. So it's not jarring like that. And the last one is emotional. So this is building character around your brand or your identity and bringing delight to users. And as you can sort of see here, we've got like a couple of 404 pages. And the first one is like an actual character. And then the other one is just using a very simple like rotation, but it's giving us like a little bit more than what you could do just like statically, right? So each of these, as what I wanted to sort of show here is that you could do something really intense, like a character animation, because there's a lot of work that goes into character animation, or you can do something really, really simple, like just simply rotating, like a donut. So both of these are building the character, and it's sort of like a dimension on top of that, because we have like color and typography and spacing, but we also have like content writing in here. So we have things like oh snap, right? Like no, like quote unquote normal brand would say oh snap, right? We're building some character, we're building some tone in the brand, and that's what this emotional side of animation is doing. Same with the Duncan, that is that's using two puns in two sentences. So that again is also building brand in a different way and character in a different way, but then also leverages animation. So those are the three sort of like types that we're sort of like looking at today. And when you're going to create an animation, you need to sort of like think about like why that sort of like which one you're trying to attempt, because each type of animation has different tools that you can sort of filter down because of this. All right. The second decision is product lifecycle. So product lifecycle is sort of like where you are at with the product. So what I mean by that is where, like, what part are you designing right now? Are you designing a proof of concept, or are you trying to get something production ready? So are you trying to sort of prove that this prototype should be something that we should look into? Excuse me. Or is it something that needs to be done tomorrow, like something that needs to be launched live? So ideally, proof of concept is a low barrier to entry, meaning that anybody can pick up the tool and within about like 10, 15 minutes or so can create something. And also it has a quick feedback and iteration loop, right? Because it is a proof of concept. It's not the actual thing. It's not something that's going to be pushed live. So we do want to be able to create something and put it out there, and then sort of see what people like and don't like, and then take that feedback and iterate on it. So think of that as like wireframes, for example, versus like actual UI design. So when you go to do wireframes and you do something pen and paper, you want to be able to just throw it away if necessary. Versus UI design is going to take you a lot longer, a lot more time, and a lot more investment to do that. And to change that is also a bit more time investment. So then we got production ready. So this is like this can be two things or both of these things. So it can be communicated easily to a developer, or it's exportable directly to code, right? So this is really important when we're trying to think of like, is this actually possible for a developer to create? Because that's a whole nother thing. Is animation can be really, really hard for a developer to replicate. So if you have that in mind when you're going to create these, then it's always a good idea to involve them in the process so that you know that it will be able to be done. Whether it's like resources or just simply skill level, because some developers aren't used to doing a whole bunch of animations, so they may not know how to pull it off. So it's really good to know what your developer is capable of, and also be able to have that open communication with them. All right, and then decision number 3 is the actual tools themselves. So I'm going to go through a few different tools as we go through like a big list, and throughout that I might like stop and like have a look at the like a different Chrome tab. So I might need to change that as I'm going through. But yeah, let's dive in. All right, so the first sort of like, I guess, grouping of animation tools is the vector bitmap based, meaning that they are really about rectangles and pieces of type, right? Like layers of type. So when we sort of like think about that, their abstraction actually doesn't allow for certain things. So what I mean by that is that they are essentially a drawing tool. So the willingness of them to go to a production ready thing, so being able to go to like a developer really easily, is actually quite low, because the translation that needs to happen there is a lot. So it technically can be translated, but it's a lot more work. So let's dive into each one of these. So Figma, if we think about like the functional side of animation, we can't, there are some bits and pieces that you could do as a functional thing, but it's very, very low, right? The way that I define this is that does it even do like the bare minimum of a hover state? And neither Sketch nor Figma do that, which is unfortunate. But the structural side of things, they do that. It's good to note here that only a couple of like months to about a year ago, neither of Figma or Sketch did the structural side of things. So you never know when Figma and Sketch might start doing the functional side of things, making sure that like there's states in your components and stuff like that, or your symbols for that matter. Both of them are very good at the proof of concept side of things. Like, because they're low barriers to entry, they're already the tools that most designers are using. But as I mentioned, they're not really production ready. So it's not something that you can easily communicate to a developer. And it's not something that like that you can just like give to a developer and they understand what's going on. You somewhat have to explain what's happening in each frame. And they are quite rudimentary animations. Figma has a lot better animations, but Sketch has very, very rudimentary animations that are going on between screens. Then we've got Adobe XD. That one has a higher score on the functional side of things, because it actually has, as of November 2019, it has the concept of states, which is really, really helpful. So that way of doing things allows us to see that there is like there is hope for these other tools to actually do that as well. Then we move on to After Effects. After Effects is like what most animations that you see in After Effects, in Dribble, you see most of those are made by Dribble. Made by After Effects. So those animations can range from like little things like we sort of like saw in that activate button, all the way to like movie production ready kind of things. So things like exploding and gunshots and all that kind of crazy stuff. We can do all of that in After Effects. So After Effects is like a really big tool, and it's not just meant for UI animation. It's meant for all kinds of animation, and as the name suggests, effects after the fact of shooting. So yes, it can definitely do functional. Yes, it can definitely do structural. Yes, it can do the proof of concept. But as I sort of said, like it depends on your skill level with After Effects. Your skill level of After Effects, it is sort of like going into Photoshop for the first time, right? There's just tools everywhere. You have no idea what anything does. But after a while, if you're used to the tool, it can be quite easy to create something and reuse something that you've created previously. And then production ready, it sort of gets a mess score as well. I'll go into this a little bit later, but this with a plugin called Lottie actually allows you to make some stuff production ready. But I'll get into that a little bit later. Then we've got Principle. So Principle is a Mac app, and that allows us to look at functional and structural very, very easily. And again, it does have a better lower barrier of entry than like After Effects, for example, definitely. But it can become quite cumbersome if you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, there's that. And then same thing with production ready. It definitely, you can communicate your ideas, but you definitely can't just export it as code. ProtoPie is the exact same. ProtoPie and Flinto and Principle almost share the exact same sort of like problems, that they all do functional and structural, and they are able to do a proof of concept because a lot of them already have like communities based around them. So you're able to drag and drop other people's work into your files and like get started pretty easily. But if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, the learning curve is a little bit higher than something like Sketch or Figma. And then the production ready side of things, so they can communicate the idea, but they're not very good at exporting to code because they don't. So yeah, let's dive into the next set. So the next set is code-based animation tools. So this means that you have some sort of knowledge of code, not necessarily like that you like know it in and out, but you know how it works. You know how like what CSS transitions are and what are available to you based on that. So Spirit, this is like all the links to all of these are in the chat. I forgot to mention that, but you can always like go out and check these after the fact, and I'll go through some of my favorites and my personal workflow at the end of this, so you can sort of see like how I would deal with all of this. But Spirit is an app that allows you to. It's like a Chrome plugin essentially that allows you to go onto anybody's website and then actually manipulate their something on a page, which is really, really cool because you can like animate something that you didn't think would be animatable. So it's a really cool way to do that. But it's all in the browser. So it's sort of like Inspect Element, if you've ever used that for Chrome or Safari or Firefox for that matter. And it allows you to edit the animation of that through like an inspector tool kind of thing. So functional, yes. Structural, no. So what I mean by that is you can definitely animate different things in there. It also can do the emotional side of things really easily because you can animate different parts of an SVG really easily. But the functional and structural side of things, well, functional definitely, structural not so much because of the fact that it won't allow you to transition between multiple pages and do that. So proof of concept, yes, it's a quick way to get into that if you know what you're doing. And then production ready, yes, you can actually download a JSON file, which is essentially like the template of all your sort of stuff that you've just edited into one place. Then we've got Webflow. And as you may know, I am a bit of a fanboy for Webflow, but the functional and structural, yes, definitely you can do that. And they do have a whole course on interactions inside of Webflow. So it's a really cool way to do that, as well as it integrates with a thing called Lottie. Again, I'll get into that in a second. That allows you to bring in After Effects things straight from After Effects into Webflow, which makes it really nice. Proof of concept. I find that once you know how to use Webflow, to create a proof of concept in Webflow takes me about 5-10 minutes. So about as long as it would for something like Flinto or something like ProtoPie. But yes, the learning curve is there for sure. And then production ready. Yes, it definitely is, because if you are on a certain plan, you can export the code to a completely different project. Like if you're using you don't want to use Webflow as a hosting service, you can export the code and use it somewhere else. Or you can just simply host it on Webflow and use it as a website there. Then we've got CodePen. So CodePen, I'll show you what that is in a second. But CodePen is a great little tool to edit code really easily without having to set up a whole development environment. So it makes it really easy to get started and go from there. So definitely good with functional, definitely good with structural. Proof of concept, again, you actually need to know how to code in this one because it only knows code. Whereas something like Webflow, there's blocks that you can move around. There's attributes that you can manipulate. Whereas CodePen, you actually have to learn how to code. So the learning curve on that is a little bit more steep. But again, once you know how to code, it becomes really easy to create something and run with it. Again, there's a community around CodePen, so it allows us to use a lot of what other people have created and piggyback off of that. So then we got the production ready. Yes, definitely, because it's all code. Then we've got After Effects and Lottie. So After Effects and Lottie. So Lottie is actually a framework created by Airbnb, believe it or not. And they put together a plugin that allows you to take an After Effects file and then transform it into a common language called JSON. So JSON is, think of it like almost like how you have an Excel spreadsheet and you're able to export that to a CSV, so a comma separated values. It's very similar to that, where it's like a lot of different companies can take a CSV and upload it to their system and generate something out of that based on that CSV. Same sort of thing as JSON. It's a very like easy way to pass a lot of information. So you can give things like nested values and arrays and all kinds of crazy stuff. So this allows you to actually have a common language between a whole bunch of different tools. So Lottie allows you to use it on web and on native devices. So iOS and Android. So the way to build this kind of thing actually makes it a lot easier to go from After Effects to production ready very, very quickly. So functional, yes. Structural, not so much. Like you wouldn't really use a structural After Effects thing. You can definitely show it as like a proof of concept in terms of the structural side of things, but you wouldn't want it to be the production ready structural animation. And what I mean by that is the structural animation, usually you do that as part of like actual code rather than like doing an After Effects animation to do that. So proof of concept, again, like the barrier to entry for After Effects is quite high. So like again, it is a little bit a little bit steep, but there is a lot of community around the Lottie side of things. So you can get started with someone else's animation and run with that. And then production ready, definitely. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is frameworks. So frameworks are like essentially, if you think about like Bootstrap and what that meant for like the coding and design community a while ago, that allowed us to sort of like have a common way of looking at everything and an abstraction on top of everything. So the abstraction allowed us to design and develop very quickly. And same thing with the frameworks, animation frameworks. So there's things like Framer is a framework. Things like what was it, Pop Motion? They have a thing called Pose, and that's a React.js framework that is all an animation library. So these are all just predefined animations that we can then leverage in code that we can help out with. So this allows us to, again, communicate with developers very, very easily, but it's highly dependent on the developer. That's why I sort of said that, yes, you can do the functional, yes, you can do the structural, but the proof of concept is a big learning curve as well, because you have to talk through with your developer what you do want, what you don't want, and create that with them. So you have to do some sort of like pair programming. And yes, of course, it is production ready. Because it's code-based and because it's the actual code that's going into the website. All right, I know that was a lot, but I wanted to go through each one of those to sort of like give you a better understanding. And then what I'm going to do though is talk about my personal workflow. And this is my workflow since I've gone freelance. Previously, my workflow was working with developers and understanding like what they need from an understanding of like the frameworks that they're in. So a lot of the developers that I was working with were using React.js, and that allowed us to like create a website and an app very, very quickly. But there was also a lot of like plugins and sort of like useful like packages that we could use based on that. So things like Pop Motion's Pose, that really helped with like animations and stuff like that. So I'll show you some of those in just a second. But really, like my workflow looks a little bit crazy, but it's actually not that crazy when you sort of like think about it. So for the major things that I use, generally I use Figma's design tool and Figma's prototype tool, and then go around in a circle for that to generate what I need. And then if I need it for things like that are a little bit more animation heavy, more character driven, more like just harder to pull off in something like Figma, then I'll go to After Effects or Lottie and use either my own like After Effects animation, or I can use something that the community has created, which is really cool. So as you can sort of see, there actually is a plugin for Figma that allows you to drag and drop in After Effects or Lottie files and or drag and drop in someone else's work from the community, which is really cool. But then we can also see that going from Figma to Webflow, that is a manual process. Like there isn't a export to Webflow button, unfortunately. You do have to translate that. So that's why it can be a little bit hard to translate all of that information over to a dev. But that's why I tend to stay within that one design tool and keep it low fidelity as much as I possibly can. So then it's nice and easy to go from that to something like Webflow and go from there. Then we also have a code export from After Effects and Lottie into Webflow, which is actually really, really cool. So again, I'll show you that in just a second. But what that allows us to do is take that same After Effects and Lottie animation and actually drag and drop that into a Webflow component and use that as we may need to. So yeah, so that's sort of my workflow. And what I'll do now is, like, for the people who aren't in the live chat that are watching this later, here's all the links to that so they can take a screenshot. So feel free to do that. But while that's up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm going to go back to my other thing and then go to share my my whole Chrome. So let's go application window and share this. All right. So it's going to look a little bit crazy for a second, but then we'll go to here. So let me know if you can't see the screen, because I know we had a problem with this last time, but hopefully this works. So I won't bore you with Figma and Sketch because I think a lot of you will be like aware of what Figma and Sketch can do. But you can do some really cool animations with Figma and Sketch. With Sketch in particular, like let's just quickly create something. Let's create a draft here. So this one here, I was helping a student out with like a slideshow. So like how to create like a really basic slideshow. So if I click on play here, so I just had like a really basic like slideshow between the two, and just sort of showing like how you can create that in Figma. All right. So Figma allows you to do some really basic stuff like this. Not too crazy like animations like flying everywhere or anything like that, but just really functional animations to show you out like what's happening. Sketch, on the other hand, is a little bit less so. The prototyping tool on this is not that crazy. It is just very, very basic transitions between screens. So it's like slide over. Think of like InVision, like the basic version of InVision, not InVision Studio, but just the basic version of InVision. That is like the animation that you get, really, of just sliding over one artboard over the other artboard. Adobe XD, as I sort of mentioned, there's a lot more animations in there now, and you can do things like hover states and so on, which is really, really cool. Principle for Mac, as I sort of discussed, this is a lot more very much like emotional and functional driven, but like the learning curve is a little bit higher. So definitely a cool tool. As the name suggests, Principle for Mac, it is only Mac available for Mac, same as Sketch, but Adobe XD and Figma are available for both PC and Mac as well. So you can integrate with both Figma and Sketch into Principle and bring in some of your designs from that and go from there. Flinto, very similar. Principle Flinto.
Looks like we've lost Kieran there for a time. Hopefully he joins us in a minute, but whilst we wait for him and hopefully he can jump back on. Thank you for your questions. It's great to see them there. I'm definitely not the best person to answer them for you, so I'm going to leave the majority of them for Kieran. but I will try and answer some of the ones that I can answer. The one that I perhaps can do most easily is, I think a couple of people have asked for the vector bitmap, those comparison slides that I'm curious before. And just to say that absolutely we can share that with you. Otherwise, what will happen at the end of the webinar is we will send out a recording of the full webinar, and you're able to take as many screenshots from that as you would like. So you should hopefully get that that done for you. I'm not sure if we are going to get Kieran back. I'm going to try and see if I can get him on to chat quickly. And if we haven't, then what we will do is we can finish recording the last part of the webinar and we'll send that out to you. Oh, you're back.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Sorry about that, guys.
No problem. I just answered the one question on this list that I could, and your timing was perfect because I just finished.
Awesome. All right. So, hopefully, let's go back to enable that screen sharing, and let's see if that will work again. Okay, I might leave my. There we go. I might leave my notifications on just so that if it is starting to get a bit garbled, you can hit me up and let me know. All right. So I think I probably left you about where I was talking about Principle and Flinto and ProtoPie. So in those three things are pretty much identical. They can all come from Figma or Sketch or Adobe XD for that matter, and you can import those things into it. The cool thing about these tools is that the barrier to entry is a lot lower than something like Code, but the downside of that is that they're not really meant for getting it to be production ready, unfortunately. So just something to be aware of. All right. So then we've got After Effects, as I sort of mentioned, and they're sort of showing off here. It is meant for movies mainly, but a lot of people use it for UI animation because it is one of those things that makes it really, really easy to create, which is nice. So the UI animation and the ability to go from something like After Effects to Lottie allows us to connect that up to production ready things as well. All right. So then we have, let's move that dashboard over there. So then we have the Spirit one. So this Spirit was the one that I was talking about, how you can go to someone's live site and inspect element essentially and animate things. So it's a really cool way to do that. As you can sort of see, there's like a little bit of an animation as to how it actually works. And you get like a little timeline like you would in After Effects or Principle or anything like that, and allows you to do all kinds of like cool animations based on SVGs. And as you can sort of see, there's a few different things that you create, like attributes that you can edit along a timeline, and that allows you to do what you need to do. All right, and then we've got, I'll leave Webflow and Lottie towards the end. I'll get some of the other things out of the way. But CodePen is a really cool tool that allows you to, again, like have that community around what you need. So this allows you to go into, let's say, CodePen and do what you need to do here. So let me just type in. Maybe let's go to, I don't know, like something around buttons. Okay. So I can then click into these buttons, and then all of these are coded up. So as you can sort of see, like we've got like some animations happening here, and we can sort of like do all this. And all of this is based on the actual code that you sort of see on the screen. So there's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this allows me to then sort of like do what I need to do without necessarily like having to like build all this code myself, but I can come in here and change some of these colors. So we've got the active color here. If I change this to FFF or FF 0000, that will be red. And then we can sort of like then start to see the actual colors start to change across everything without necessarily having to do anything. But again, that depends on your skill level of how you might be able to do that. All right. Then we've got Framer. So Framer does have more of a visual interface, but it does allow you to like export out to code. And it does mean that you do sort of have to have a bit of like coding knowledge as well as like the design knowledge to do like really cool stuff in here. But you can make it so that it does like just solely work on the design side of things. But generally, if you want to get the best out of it, you're going to have to learn a little bit about code to do that. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff that you can go through Framer and sort of see like what they do and what they don't do. Again, they do have a pretty big community inside of Framer, which is great. Means that you can leverage other people inside of that. There's also a Lottie player, as you can sort of see, which means that you're able to take other people's designs and play them inside of Framer, which is really, really cool. Then we've got Pose. So Pose is just one of the millions of code frameworks about animation that you can use. Yeah, definitely like have a look through that. But as you can sort of see, we can like put in some really basic code and get a pretty nice animation out of it. So really, really cool stuff without having to like know too much about code. You can copy and paste some of this sort of stuff and get ready really easily. So things like interactivity, like drag and drop, become really easy. Setting something up like this in code is actually a lot of work, but they've made it so that all you have to do is give it a hoverable true, draggable X, and then drag bounds left and right. So what it's sort of saying is like, I'm going to give you some parameters around your attributes that you can use to like make this interactive. And again, like without much effort, so a couple of lines of code, and you've got a really great component that you can use throughout it. So yeah, so let's go back to Webflow and the Lottie sort of stuff. So Webflow, the reason why I'm such a fanboy about Webflow is because it allows you to actually create your own websites as a freelancer, but also do some really, really cool stuff in that. So inside of here, let's go to most liked. Webflow has the ability to actually download other people's stuff and use that as the base of your code, right? So you can actually take someone's full website like this and download that to your account, and then use that as the base of like a project that you're going to be working on. So there's a lot of like open source, great people doing things in this community. Based on that, there's actually a website called flowbase.co, which is some of the same people from the Webflow community have come specifically here to upload their stuff here, which allows you to then have a much easier way to search everything. So again, if I typed in button to then sort of see like what is available there. So we've got some like animations. So these are all coded, ready to go. And I can just drag and drop them into my Webflow project and get that going. So then I can use it on my website today in 5 seconds. It's really, really great. So same sort of thing with Lottie. So this is just sort of like the developer documents overall. And then we also have the Lottie files. So this is a website that is essentially like Flowbase, where it's community led, and they're sort of saying like, hey, like upload your designs, make them open source, make it so that anybody can use them and use those in your designs. So there's also the marketplace, which is sort of like the paid version of this. So if you're like a really good motion designer, you can actually sell your stuff here and allow people to hire you even, as you can sort of see. You got to hire there. But there's heaps of stuff from the community, as you can sort of see. But if we typed in, I don't know, like ribbons or something like that, and that allows us to sort of like see like all these like really cool animations that people have for like celebrating something just happening, right? So you got like some confetti and some sort of like happy moment here. So not all animations are great. Like this one is absolutely terrible, but there are some really good animations in here, and that's kind of that's sort of what happens with this kind of stuff, is that you do have some good ones, you do have some bad ones. So it's up to you to find the good ones in here. But as you can sort of see, the marketplace ones are a lot more polished, right? There's a lot more going on. There's a lot more like emotional attachment to the animation, and so on. So yeah, really great way to do this. So all of these are made in After Effects and then converted into a Lottie file, which is essentially a JSON file, which allows you to then use it on iOS or web, as you may need, and Android as well. So as I sort of mentioned, there is a plugin for this. So if you go back into Figma, we can actually go into this and go to our plugins. So if I go to plugins and then I go to Lottie files, I can actually, I need to log in because I haven't done that on this frame thing. Okay, and let's log into that. And oh boy, I don't even remember. So I won't do that right now. I'll do that. What I'll do is I'll have to share, disable screen sharing, and then I'll have to go to enable screen sharing to my application window, which is my Figma, which I will open. Their actions, enable screen sharing, application window. Come on, where did it go? Oh, that's really annoying. I can't get the Figma file. Why isn't it letting me do that? Oh, there we go. Application share. So there we go. All right. So if I go to open up a new, like a new file here and go to my plugins, go to Lottie files, I can actually use one that I've created and drag and drop it into here, right? Or I can actually look at what other people have created, just like I did on the site earlier. So if I type in ribbons, like I did before, and I hit search, I can then take this like little animation here and click onto that, and then convert to GIF. So what that'll do is that'll convert it into a GIF. I can then add that to Figma, that then plays here. So as we can sort of see here, there's like a little bit of a play button here. And then over on the right-hand side, it also says that it's a GIF. And you can like hit play on this to sort of like see that, oh yeah, that's the right one, right? So the only time that this will actually be able to be played is once it's in a prototype. So it doesn't play automatically as it's going along here. But if you put it into a prototype, it'll actually show it off like that. So you just give it a second to load, and then we've got that, and then it'll loop around and do that. So this is really good for inside of your prototypes. You can drag and drop in your After Effects files into Figma. Very similar process to what you have in Webflow. But yeah, that's kind of it today. I want to leave some time for questions, and we can go over a little bit, Mandy, if you want, to make up for that 5 minutes that we kind of lost with the disconnection issue. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys have questions about.
Awesome. Thanks, Kieran. Hopefully everyone's recovered from audio issues too, and we're all on track. We don't have too much time for questions, but thank you, Kieran, for giving us some time back. I'm going to go through the questions in the questions tab, starting with those with the most upvotes, and we'll see how many we can cover off. So the first one is, I'm eager to learn Webflow. What would you recommend are good online tutorials in order to learn?
Yeah, so Webflow is actually really great about their tutorials. They actually have a Webflow 101. So let me quickly 101. Let me find that really quickly so I can give that to you. So it's about what I sort of say to my students that are with me in phase 1 or phase 2 of UX Academy, is that this is a crash course. I'll chuck this into the chat for everybody. This is a crash course that it says takes about an hour, like an hour and 58 minutes, so about 2 hours. What I sort of say is it will take you 3 to 4 times that long to actually comprehend all of that. So if you just times that by 4, so about 8 hours. So if you sort of like think about that over a weekend, you probably have 4 hours on a Saturday, 4 hours on a Sunday. You should be able to learn Webflow in about a weekend if you go through this course. And if you actually like learn it and actually play around with the tool as you're learning it, rather than just like watching the videos, that will allow you to definitely learn that from there. Again, they have millions of videos up online. So they do have this like courses kind of thing. So if you go back into courses up the top of that site there, it allows you to then see all the courses that they have. They have specifically things around animations as well that I'll also send you. And After Effects in as well. I'll put that in the chat.
So sticking with another question on Webflow, and Kieran, I think you've already answered this, but just in case you have anything specific to add, the question is, how seamless is the learning curve for Webflow for a non-coding designer? I'm very good with design tools, can prototype really well, but have never written a line of code.
Yeah, for sure. So again, with that crash course, what you're really learning is like the rules of CSS, the rules of HTML. So the rules of CSS and HTML are somewhat contradictory to what you've learned in Figma or Sketch or Adobe for that matter, Adobe XD. So what I mean by that is the abstraction layer is different. So the abstraction layer is very much vector based in something like Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD. So when you sort of look at the code based tools, they are a lot more closer to what you'll actually do. So Webflow is definitely a code-based tool. And so things like what you call the box model. So the box model has an understanding of padding, of margin, of displaying block versus inline, so on and so forth. All of that is taught in that Webflow 101 course. But again, like it's best to actually see what that is when you go to do it yourself. Things like inheritance just doesn't exist in Figma or Sketch, but it does in CSS and HTML. So that way of thinking is a little bit of a mind shift, but once that clicks, it actually makes it really easy for you to create stuff in Webflow. So I do think it's sort of like teaching you the concepts of web and coding without actually teaching you coding and the syntax, right? So without necessarily saying like, oh, you have to put a semicolon here or like make this one capitalized or whatever else, like the actual coding syntax, you can actually learn coding concepts through that. So I think if you watch that 2 hours of those videos, of those courses, and you still don't know what you're doing, that's when I'd sort of say maybe you need something a little bit more intense, and like do an actual course on HTML and CSS. But 9 times out of 10, I find that the students that I teach are able to understand Webflow with just those courses.
So I'm going to hop out of questions just for a minute because I think there was a question posted in the chat tab which links into what you've just been saying. And it's from Gwendolyn, and she asks, what code knowledge is most essential for UX designers?
I mean, web is probably more pervasive because it some of the coding knowledge there can translate into something like native development, like things like layout, things like typography, stuff like that. There's obviously like very big differences between the two, but understanding that things have attributes, things have like parameters. Once you sort of like get into that way of thinking, it's easy to translate from iOS to Android to web from there. So there is learning curves between all three of those. And even within something like iOS, you have like stuff for Xcode versus Swift. So like C++ versus Swift. And then you've got Swift UI. So there's like all different types of like coding within that. But really, like, it's hard to sort of like recommend like any specific coding language or anything like that, because every single company will use something completely different. Really, I would suggest, if anything, probably JavaScript. Even though like a lot of developers will like hate me for saying that, because JavaScript is very much not like it's like a Wild West, right? It's not really the most beautiful language in the world, but like every single company that I've worked with, there's been some sort of like JavaScript engineer, right? They've used that for like creating the website and creating the front end of anything, whether it's like really basic stuff all the way up to something like React and creating the whole app in JavaScript, right? So there's all kinds of uses for JavaScript. Some people might suggest Python. Some people might suggest like learning like something like Swift or something like that. But I find that learning something like JavaScript gives you the ability to learn about basic things like if statements and for loops and while loops and all that kind of stuff. But within an area that is not so hard to reach. Whereas something like Swift, you do have to like get a Mac, you do have to do all these kinds of things to, the barrier to entry is a lot higher. So coding in general is hard to sort of like say, oh, definitely do this. But there are, as I've mentioned in previous talks, there are like sites out there like Team Treehouse and stuff like that help you specifically form that coding side of things.
Great. I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions. The next one comes from Ethan, and Ethan asks, are keyframes and easing the core aspects to get familiar with that translate across any motion tool when designing for motion and UI micro interactions?
Yeah, so what Ethan's saying there is keyframes are essentially like the points between like the two states of any animation. So if you have someone who is like at the start of their journey and at the end of their journey, and they want to get from one place to another, really what they're doing is they're creating a keyframe at 0 and a keyframe at 100, let's say. And there's an easing curve. So the easing curve is essentially how fast or like how slow are they going to get from this place to that place? So are they going to accelerate? So are they going to run and then get puffed out and then sort of like slowly walk to the end? So that's what you call an ease in, ease out curve. Or are they going to go 100 miles an hour and then decelerate? Or are they going to accelerate and then just abruptly stop? Are they going to go exactly like 2 miles per hour all the way? There's no acceleration. There's no anything. Like what kind of way are they going to get from 0 to 100, right? And yes, I would say that understanding keyframes and understanding easing is probably the best way to do that. And we can do a whole, that's like a whole nother talk, and understanding all of those aspects of animation, like once we get into that. So we can definitely do that if that's of interest to people, as to how to set up keyframes in different tools. I'd probably stick to something like After Effects or something like Webflow. Webflow has the concept of that as well. But essentially you're creating states that you then animate between. And yeah, you're spot on there, Ethan.
Great. So our last question for today's webinar, and I think, Kieran, you did cover this off in your actual webinar itself, but alternatives for Windows for animation, what would you recommend? Or what is out there?
Yeah, so so things like After Effects is going to be there, Adobe XD is going to be there. Like I don't think Flinto has a PC version. I don't think ProtoPie has a yeah, it does actually. But yeah, Spirit is like whatever platform you want to do, Webflow, whatever platform, After Effects and Lottie, whatever platform, any of those kinds of things. So if you're looking for, again, if you go through those decisions, like what are you trying to pull off? Are you trying to pull off functional, or structural, emotional? Are you trying to pull off like the are you trying to do a proof of concept? Are you trying to do like ready for development? Like, and then when you sort of like go through those questions and you still don't know what kind of tool you're looking for, I'd sort of say like have a look into like Figma just to do the basic stuff. And then if you're missing something, go into something like After Effects, because I find that with those two things in place, you can get about like 80 to 90% of what you need done with those two tools. Anything more than that is like ProtoPie is like really popular amongst like PC users because of that, because Principal and Flinto are Mac only. So that allows you to sort of like do that. But yeah, I would sort of say like coding stuff is going to be your best bet. Like, so in terms of like being available on any operating system. But generally, yeah, the ProtoPie, Figma, and After Effects is probably going to be your best bet for PC owners out there.
Thanks, Kieran. And thank you all for joining us today. It's been wonderful to host you again. I hope you're enjoying our series on animation as we start to walk further and further down the path of understanding what it is. Our next webinar will be 2 weeks' time, so today in 2 weeks, and we will make sure to send out an invitation with details on what we're going to cover a little bit closer to the time. Kieran, thank you, and again, thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, and catch you next time.